Good morning. Denise Dryden. Third try. I don't know what it is about reparenting, but we'll see. This time I'm down a little bit closer to the water and right on the beach where you can hear the ocean. Thank you, Melody, for hanging in there. I want to talk today about reparenting, and because it's just so much fun. It's this beautiful opportunity to consciously redo parts of our life that didn't work for us, period. So with psychotherapy, it can go into extreme trauma. It can go into some really big bipolar, schizophrenia, some big issues. And that's not what we're talking about here. What I want to talk about is that opportunity to transform some things that we can take on ourselves and that we can manage by addressing things and then changing our outlook. And I thought today would be perfect to be down on the beach. I'm sitting on a boat that's been pulled up on the sand and enjoying it. I think ever so often a ferry will go by. So when something stops working for us when we're little, it can be something like traumatic, like a move, divorce, a death in the family, grandparents that pass suddenly, accidents, all of those things. And we get stuck. But it can also be something really easy or easier, like schooling, classrooms that don't work, teachers that are not a good match, parenting, having parents that are authoritarian, parents who don't know what they're doing, parents who argue and fight in front of each other, parents who diminish and disrespect each other in front of their kids. It can also be reactive, like what happens when you have a highly sensitive child that reacts to clothing and environments and sounds and movies and things that you just don't understand are gonna tip and rock a kiddo. It can also be things that are going on in the world. I worked with a kid who's about 15 this last week at a family retreat, and his perception is that the world is really mean, that there isn't a lot of kindness out there, and he has a really hard time with it. And I get that. What do you do with a world that's competitive, that pits people against each other, that thinks that separation is the best way to survive? That's not something that a lot of children can buy into because they don't see that. So what happens when something happens in our lives, when we tip, when something doesn't work, is that we have this childish lock-in. We get pissed, we get hurt, and we start being really childish. And childish is things like we have temper tantrums, we explode, we isolate and push away. I've got this whole list of words. We shame each other and our siblings and our parents. We blame them. We're self-absorbed. We get obnoxious, irrational, irresponsible, and really disrespectful. And it's like, hey, the way I see it as a kid is the world out there isn't working for me. So this is my reaction to it. And they feel really justified in that reaction. And then as adults, when we get stuck, we take those reactions and those belief systems into life with us. And we have temper tantrums at work. We have explosions with our kids in the car. We yell, we scream, we fight with our partners. We do a lot of things that are old triggered behaviors from our childhood. Does that make sense? So it shows up in how we make our livelihood. It shows up in every relationship, and it is a pattern that goes sort of through belief, reaction. Then I do this, then you do that, and we just cycle and cycle and cycle. So the reason we're talking about reparenting today is it means we get to do a do-over. We get to go, that hasn't worked for me so far. As a matter of fact, it's gotten me just about in trouble on every facet, and I feel ashamed, I feel guilty, I feel out of control. I wish that I could do things differently. And I'm here to say, let's try something different, okay? Let's go back to that time period, that child who's hurt, that child who's frustrated, that child who's lost within you, and go like, oh, so this was really hard when we moved this many times. This was really hard when mom wouldn't talk to me and she would give me the silent treatment and I didn't know what I did wrong. This is really hard. And then kind of identify that age period. And then go inside and go, so what was that like for you? I didn't like it. It made me feel like there was something wrong with me. It made me feel like I was unlovable, that I was always in trouble, that I wish my parents would, and fill in the blank. Because what we know is that almost everything in our world and context as a child comes from the parent, right? So we gently and we compassionately go, oh, yeah, that makes sense to me. And what we're doing is we're actually, as if a child of ours, as if a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old said, this is what happened today at school. And you listen and you go, oh, yeah, that must have been really hard. You don't go, well, you're so stupid for thinking that, and how dare you keep, that negative self-talk that we do when we're criticizing ourselves. We switch that over to compassionately going, oh, that must have been hard. And then once we know what happened, we go, well, how can I sort of get to know you a little bit better? How can I play with you? How can we start to reshift that into something else? So you take these new experiences and you transform them. Like if mom wasn't available and she didn't really know how to love you and she had her own stuff going on, what can we do now to go have fun and to play the way that you wanted to play when you were a little girl? When dad worked too much and you didn't have anybody to hang out with, what can you do now and be the person that you hang out with? I know this sounds really interesting, but if you're lonely, go for company. Be the company to yourself that you didn't have before. If you're scared, be calming and supportive. If you didn't feel love, feel seen and loved. And if you didn't feel smart, felt really stupid in school, then how do you find out what you were really good at? Well, yeah, I'm really terrible at math, so I'm not going to make my entire life perspective of me as someone who's a horrible student, because I know I'm really, really intelligent. I just can't do math. So we just keep reframing it with tenderness and kindness and a sense of humor, which is, oh, math, yeah, that's not going to work, but let's talk about something else like history or music or something else that sort of brings up that smile. And then take yourself out and go play. Go play. Like right now, go down to the beach, listen to the waves coming up, get on your bicycle and go for a ride. Go into the forest and take a walk. Go watch a baseball game, get a ticket and go to the game that you always wanted to go to by yourself, and buy yourself the hot dog and the beer and all of the things that you always wanted to do with your dad. This is a way to say, hey, you matter to me. And so this playfulness is the most important thing that we can do. So when you're adulting and you notice these old beliefs coming up, the most important thing that you can do is go, oh, I've forgotten about you. I've been in meetings all day and you are just like, think about raising a 4-year-old child. It's been a long day. What are we going to do when we get out of this? What are we going to go do to play? So what we do is we become the parent that we weren't, that we didn't have earlier, that we weren't experiencing as a child, that we wished we had, and we kind of hang out. So, for me, she's always this little girl, and she loves to play, and she loves to go for walks. And so moving to Bainbridge was really important for me, because now I go play in the forest. And I go out and I have breakfast on Sunday mornings after this, and I sit on a swivel chair and I move around like a little kid. And I notice that I'm starting to let go of those old beliefs that have haunted me for years. So this reparenting is so important. It's reframing. It's coming from a different perspective. And I want to take this and notch it up just one more level, which is that when we reparent, we become conscious, we become compassionate, we become present to ourselves, and then we gently sort of do this childlike playing, and we address the childish behavior, but we do it from a childlike perspective of imagination and magic and innocence and playfulness, which is what I think each of us needed. Now, let's go that one notch up, which is when we're consciously aware, then we can look at things like the work scenario and the the societal norms and say, so what parts of the world have I never liked being in? What parts of the world don't work for me and my little girl inside? What parts of the rules in the world just doesn't translate out very well? Dr. Alan Watkins talked about, he's a neuroscientist who did a TED Talk, and it's on this Facebook page if you want to go back and click on it. And he said basically between 3 and 6, we learn how to use this vocabulary, this voice, and put a sound with like hair, shirt, woman, ocean, sand, boat, and we learned how to say that. What we forget is that we learn how to say that from people who have their own lens and their own perspective. So sometimes the world that we live in is a box that was framed by the people who taught us. And that's not good or bad or right or wrong. It just means that was their experience. That was the box that they knew. So when we have this opportunity to go back and say, wow, I don't know the words or the emotions behind no race, between differentiating between genders, between who works and who doesn't work, between what is valued in education and what isn't valued in education. Then we start to consciously choose how we reframe this to ourselves as a child, which is, I need a broader box. I don't need a box at all. I need a broader world where I have a lot more freedom to create ideas of who people are and what matters and what creativity is and what is needed in this enormous time of change that we're having in our country, in our world. So when we start with ourselves and we go back and we go from reaction, belief, pattern, childish reactions, explosiveness, even to the point where you're yelling or you're angry with your spouse, with your children, with your world. How do you go back and reframe that and say, why are we yelling? What are we mad about? Oh, that makes sense to me. So then what can we do differently that's going to change this around? And I'm going to start addressing those old hurts in you, and we're going to find a way to look at the world differently, with opportunity, with choice, with magic, and we're going to start creating something different. So I think this is the only way we can go. So we go off of selfish into self-love. We go out from looking at what's failing to what can I do to nurture that alone. So these are the kind of things I do. If you're interested in reparenting and learning tools and knowing what works and how to transform that, give me a call. I would love to work with you. You have a great Sunday, and I will talk with you soon.